Hey guys, this is Al again. So the last time I gave you an update on this car, we'd had it all put back together again, but we ran into an issue where the two back cylinders were missing. They just were completely dead. And we went through a full diagnostic process trying to figure out what was going on, and I think we figured it out. But before I tell you what the problem is, let me walk through some of the diagnostics that we did, because I think it's really relevant, especially for people who have these cars, or even if you don't have these cars, you have any other car, you're probably going to need to go through some of this process. All right, so let me take the camera off, and I'll swing it over to the engine, and then I'll show you what we end up doing. Yeah, so first of all, there was a dead miss, and the engine was just running really, really rough. It was just rocking. And we couldn't figure out what the issue was. What I started doing, which isn't fun at all, is I have a little plug removal tool, plug wire removal tool, and I started removing the plug wires one by one, removing them and installing them, and seeing which cylinder was dead. Basically, effectively, what you do is you pull a plug wire, and if you don't see any kind of noticeable difference in the engine, then you know that there's a problem with that cylinder, right? And then you put it back and you move on to the next one, and if it runs the same, you know that there's a problem with that cylinder, it's missing, and then you move into the next one. And what I found is that the two back cylinders were completely dead. They weren't firing at all. So initially I thought, well, it may be plug wires, but the plug wires were sparking. So I pulled the plugs out and took a look at them. The plugs were brand new, they're brand new NGK plugs, but I thought, you know what the hell, I'm going to go and reinstall the old spark plugs. Reinstalled the old spark plugs, didn't make a world of difference. Pulled the plug wire again, installed the new plug onto it, just left it somewhere, grounded against one of these things. I can't remember what it was, but I could see a spark. Alright, so the next thing that we did is we put an inline spark tester. And if you've never seen one of these before, I don't have it with me. I was hoping that I could show you what it looks like, but it's not here at the shop right now. The kid must have taken it with him when he went out of town. But you basically plug it in between the plug wire and the spark plug, and it looks like a test light. So you'll just see a flashing spark as it goes through. So those definitely spark. Right, we checked that. So the next thing we thought, well, maybe there's a compression problem. Maybe we screwed up the job, or maybe the cylinder head was screwed up. We couldn't think of anything else, so we started doing compression testing. We only did a compression test on the two back cylinders because those were the ones that were basically problematic. So we have a little compression testing tool. This is a real useful tool to have if you're trying to figure out a problem like this, because there's only really three things that will stop an engine from firing. Right? There's spark. You need to have spark. You need to have fuel, and you need to have air. And compression is what causes the air to kind of compress the air and make it dense enough for there to be an explosion, right? So I got this thing, I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago from Harbor Freight. It was very inexpensive, but it's come in real handy multiple times. We ended up testing the compression in the back two cylinders, and they were fine. They were within acceptable range, so everything looked good there. What else did I end up doing? So the other thing I was thinking, maybe there's a giant vacuum leak in the system. So I pulled out my little Vacutech smoke machine. We basically plugged it in. This is a vacuum line. It's plugged off right now because the cruise control isn't wired up. But this deal, we taped up the intake. We started feeding smoke through this. Couldn't find any smoke. So we thought, well, it's not vacuum, it's not compression, it's not spark. The only thing that came to my mind was fuel injectors. You know, it wasn't getting fuel. So I started cracking these lines open, and look at that. That could be a problem. So I need to make sure that this is on tight because it's weeping a little bit. But so we started cracking the fuel lines open, and some of them would squirt out a lot and some of them wouldn't squirt out a lot. And initially my first thought was, well, the ones that weren't squirting out a lot may have been plugged up. So what we did is, you know, knowing that there was a problem with these two back cylinders, what I end up doing, and it's kind of a chore to look at it this way, so I'm going to switch over to the other side, but I end up removing the fuel injector lines. And oh, let me tell you what else we did. Another test that we actually checked, because we were trying to figure out whether there was a rich running condition, whatever, a lean running condition. We used an infrared thermometer to measure the temperature at the exhaust manifolds for each cylinder, and we could see that these two back cylinders were cold. Right, you know, every other cylinder was around 200 Fahrenheit. These ones were like less, or 250 Fahrenheit. These ones were like in the hundreds. So we figured, okay, these ones are cold. So what I end up doing next, and I'll switch over to the other side to show you, but we end up, you know, effectively I had to take everything off on that side, which is why I don't want to show you, because it's real hard to get to. But we took the injector lines off here. So I just literally did that right now, and I tried to squirt a little bit of carb cleaner in there and seeing what would happen, and then following up with compressed air. So I have my little rubber tip blowgun. It's got about 125 psi at that compressor, anywhere between 125 and 90 psi, because that's where the compressor kicks in. But I end up basically running some compressed air, mixing it up with carb clean, and just blowing through the injectors. And you can sometimes hear an injector. You can tell when an injector is working because you can hear it sing. When it opens up, it makes this kind of noise like Chewbacca, and that's when you know it's working, right? That's when you know when these old CIS injectors are working. So I did that to those two cylinders in the back, and then I also did it to the cylinders over here on this side, but I didn't do the two front ones. And the reason I didn't do those two front ones is because it's just there's too much crap to get through, and I didn't want to deal with it right now. But you know, sure enough, the car now runs a lot better. It still has a hesitation, and I know that one of these or two of these injectors still aren't functioning correctly, and so I can tell that. But if you listen to it now and hear it start, see, and it starts off rough, but then it starts to balance out. And what that tells me is that the fuel injectors are still clogged. But once it balances out, you know, it's running pretty smooth. And it's idling pretty smooth, right? Okay, so long and short, basically, we tried the following things to figure out what the problem was. Check spark, multiple ways. You swap the plugs out, see if the plugs were a problem, plugs weren't a problem. Check the leads to make sure that the leads were sparking correctly using an inline tester. That seemed to be working fine. We did a compression test to see if we were getting enough compression. We got good compression results on the two back cylinders. We didn't test the rest, but we did test those two cylinders. And that came back okay. And so then we used the Vacutech smoke machine check for vacuum leaks, and we didn't have any vacuum leaks. We made sure that that was the case. So at the end of that, we kind of figured, well, it's probably the injectors, right? And which is odd, because I cleaned them and I made sure that they were cleaned while they were sitting on the table, but I guess they must have, just from sitting or something like that, had some kind of problems. But in any case, I was able to get those two back cylinders running okay by blowing in compressed air, mixing it with some carb cleaner, and just basically pushing carb cleaner through it with compressed air. And eventually I was able to free it up. The car runs a hell of a lot smoother right now than it did before. One of the other tests that we did is that we used an infrared thermometer to check the exhaust outputs on the cylinder head, just to see what the temperatures were, and the two back cylinders had the lowest reading on the passenger side. So they were like, everything else was in the 200 range. They were in the 100 Fahrenheit, under 200 range of in the temperature. So it was running cool, which meant that the cylinder was working, but it wasn't firing. So I just did that same test right now, which you saw, and those cylinders are now hotter than any other cylinders that are in there. So clearly the other fuel injectors, while they're operating, are not operating very, very well. So we need to replace the injectors or pull them out and get them cleaned. I don't want to mess with it. I just want to get them replaced and just swap them out and be done with it. So that's going to be my goal next, is to swap the injectors. I'm curious as to whether the injectors are exactly the same as the CIS injectors. This is a CIS injector from Mercedes-Benz, as the CIS injectors from the Mercedes-Benz. If they are, then sweet, because I can pick them up at Worldpac and get them, in the next day or so. If not, then I'm going to have to order them from the UK, and I'd rather shoot myself in the face. But that is what it is. And so I think we figured it out. You heard it run. It still has a slight hesitation, but that's really indicative of a car with dirty injectors. I have a bunch of old Mercedes from the 80s and 90s that have CIS. I've got the 450 SLC. I've got the 500 SL. I got the 560 SL. I got the 560 SEC, 560 SEL. Anyway, they all have that same thing. When they don't run well, and they start stumbling, it's usually the injectors that are the problem. And you can usually clean them, and I usually always clean them, but it's easy to get to those injectors on a Mercedes-Benz. It's a pain in the rear to do those injectors on this car. So I'd rather just swap them out and be done with it, and just call it quits. So here's the update. You heard it running. I think everything's okay. It's not running hot. It seems to be behaving. I'm very happy. Thank you very much. It's the night before Thanksgiving. It's 8 o'clock in the evening right now. Happy Thanksgiving for all of you guys in the US, and tune in next week. Thank you very much. Take care.